Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, the Bet the Board production, part of the Amazon Wondery Podcast Network. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by racing colleague and professional bettor Chris Wormy. And Wormser, we're going to wine country this weekend, my friend. Break out the cheese platter, pop your favorite bottle of white or red. It's Sonoma and a little bit of road course racing.
Oh, I love Sonoma. This is probably my favorite road course, and wine is also one of my favorite beverages. So kind of a perfect week to get back on track, hopefully. Rough weekend last weekend with our bets, but I think we'll come back strong. I like the card so far this week.
You have been to a number of tracks in the past. Is Sonoma already one that Chris Wormy has placed his stamp of approval on, or is it something you've only seen from afar when you're watching on TV?
I have been there. I had a lot of money on Truex. I believe it was like 2015 or 16. And he blew a cylinder and was still running competitive times when he was leading. And then he got passed by Harvick, and Harvick ultimately ended up winning. But it was a great experience. Really cool place to see. I think the hardest thing to understand when you're watching Sonoma on TV is just the elevation change. I mean, it's on the side of a hill. So I think that you have a completely different perspective watching this race after you've seen it on TV. So I highly recommend everyone go there, drink some wine, have a good time, and check out some good racing.
For those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, we'll set the stage here. We divide this thing up into parts. Stage one, a race recap of everything we saw unfold. Usually rather brief, much like stage one will be this weekend from Sonoma, as we try and unpack some of the learnings from Gateway. Stage two, a little bit of a deep dive into some more in-depth gambling conversation. I think a lot of listeners of all ability levels will find fascinating. So I'll tease that for this week before we get there. And stage three, of course, a deep dive in the longest stage of the program, as we'll go into a full race breakdown, identifying track specifics, track comps, and a lot of the drivers to watch. So without further ado, Worm, we may as well jump right into stage one. And that, of course, is trying to highlight what we saw last weekend at Gateway. They used the intermediate package on the 1.25 mile track. We saw flat turns in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Your beloved 8 car of Kyle Busch claims his third win of the season. And to be honest, buddy, he feels like the least dominant 3-race winner so far this season, but he is starting to flash some consistency. And I imagine the rest of the field is taking notice.
I think so. I mean, he's been very opportunistic for sure. But it's so important to win when you have the chance, because it is so hard to win. I mean, you have different strategies, you have pit road issues, and it's been hard to pass in this car. So, right now he's sitting in third in projected playoff points, kind of standings behind Blaney and Byron. Here's the one thing that I think is really important to look forward in the future. If we look back at last year, this track raced very similar to Phoenix, and Joey Logano went out and won the race last year at Worldwide Technology, and then he went on to win the championship. I'm not going to go ahead and say that Kyle Busch is going on to win the championship, but it was the same tire that they used at Phoenix. I know that the 8 team and Kyle Busch struggled there earlier in the year, but I think that this is a sign that they're heading in the right direction. And if they get in the Final Four, I think we're going to be really happy that we're sitting on that 18-1 ticket for him to win the championship.
When you look at some of the other takeaways from the race, I have a couple other bullets that I do want to get to on this, and it's more the way that this race played out, not necessarily that the best car didn't go on to win, because Kyle Busch put together an electric lap in qualifying. It got him the track position, and he was able to race his way through the field when he got shuffled back at least a few positions. But some of the drivers that you took note of, guys that you were surprised by how they performed, or drivers that you were overall disappointed in the way that they finished compared to what you saw in practice and what your expectations were on race day.
Oh, I think Ross Chastain was a massive disappointment. I mean, he loved his car in practice. I thought that his lap times looked really, really competitive, and he was terrible. A bad finish for him, never even a factor in this race. And he honestly hasn't been a factor since the Rick Hendrick comments. I'm just curious if that kind of took his edge. Like, at a place where it's really hard to pass, you have to be aggressive on restarts. And Ross Chastain has been more aggressive than anybody the last 2 years on these restarts. And you just haven't seen him be that same driver. I'm just kind of curious if that's maybe kind of taking the edge off a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how he runs this week at Sonoma. A little different than Coda, where he's a little bit more successful. But man, what a real shocker out of Ross Chastain. I would say that the biggest surprise, even though that it kind of didn't end in a surprise, was Kyle Larson. I thought that he was average at best all day. Cliff Daniels goes out and takes a chance on a 2-tire stop, gets a decent restart, and is able to get a good finish relative to how good his car was. So credit to that 5 team getting a good finish where, they've been feast or famine for the most part. So for them to kind of turn what was a very average day into a good day, kudos to them.
You mentioned Ross Chastain, and I think it's a great point talking about how he looks like a driver. I don't want to use something as aggressive as saying he's been neutered out there on the track.
Yeah.
But we saw it last year that he was a lot less aggressive when some of his compatriots made comments about it. The big difference, though, Worm, this point last year, he already had 2 wins in the bank.
Yeah.
Right
that's
now,
it's a
very
deal.
different story. So you don't have the win at Coda. You don't have the win at Talladega. And while you do want to scale it back because payback is going to be a bitch when you get to some of the biggest races, it's going to be a moot point if he doesn't have a race win or if he's not able to secure passage to the postseason or rack up some of the playoff points. And we'll get to Chastain a little bit later in the show. But I do think it's going to be interesting to watch the one and how he can channel some of that aggression, still get the most out of his car, but put together better finishes than what we've seen over the last handful of weeks.
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I think that the one has enough speed in that race car, but you just haven't seen that competitive edge. In Ross is Ross is a driver that's fast everywhere we've gone all year. So for him to kind of not be fast, especially after he loved his car so much in practice and qualifying, something doesn't sit right. And I'm not saying that that's the reason, but that is at least a viable explanation for why he struggled so much. And until I read anything else, I'm just going to kind of stick to the fact that maybe he's just not being as aggressive. And the minute he kind of lays back, he really loses his edge on the rest of the field.
Well, maybe even more troubling because his teammate that had been the model of mediocrity over the last 10 to 12 races puts together one of his best showings.
Sure.
So clearly Trackhouse had the performances there. I texted you watching that race on Sunday. And look, I know NASCAR can't control lightning delays. We can't control Mother Nature. But these end of race situations are getting to be unbearable. You and I love to take shots at F1. The field gets strung out. A driver, typically Max Verstappen, wins by 25 seconds. So you don't have 900 cautions left. And I'm not saying NASCAR needs to think about imposing a time limit on the race once it goes green. But come on, something has to get done when we're going through the ridiculousness of all of these late race restarts. And the goal of the sport is to bring more eyeballs to it. We've seen baseball go through rule changes to shorten the commitment. We're NASCAR fans, and when I text you, dude, I've had enough of this. Like, I can't watch the last 20 laps and commit another 2.5 hours to watching this garbage unfold. I'm not saying you and I can solve all of NASCAR's problems, but is this a bigger issue, or am I making too big a deal of it, or is it something we should be concerned about as fans?
I would say that this is a product of just the inability to pass. I think if you looked at, if there's 20 laps to go in a race and there's a car that's clearly better than everyone else over, just a 15 to 20 lap run that's restarting 4th or 5th. If they thought that they had a chance to race their way up to the win, I think you'd see them be a little bit more conservative on these restarts, but it's so hard to pass. I don't know if there was a green flag pass, for the lead at all on Sunday. Everyone just realizes that, hey, if you're going to get a decent finish, you better get a good restart on these, on what we would consider the money restart or the last restart of the race. And because everyone is driving so competitively and is so up on the wheel, you're starting to see just cautions breed more cautions. And it becomes really, really difficult for, anyone with long run speed to be competitive in a race if they lose a spot or two. So I'm not sure that there's anything we can do in the short run. I think long run, it's a little bit more on Goodyear than anything else. I thought Denny Hamlin did a great job of talking about the difference between fall off with heat in the tires versus wear in the tires. That was something that I had never heard of before. So I just think that you got to look to Goodyear to provide a tire that falls off. So that way, once you're inside your window, you actually think that there's an advantage to maybe pitting and taking tires, because last week there wasn't. And whenever you have that, everyone was done pitting with 25 to go. You're just going to have restart after restart, and everyone's just going to be clawing and scrapping for every single position because they know that, if they don't do it, someone else will. And I think that's what's kind of breeding these cautions late in a race.
Yeah, and we saw a little bit of that at Gateway. I mean, the longer those runs went, we saw multiple grooves come in. The track started to rubber up, and every time we got a caution, it was this groove is going to disappear. When the tires cooled off, it picked up all the rubber, and it really changed some of the racing dynamics. So I think we've done a good job encapsulating what we saw at Gateway, as you alluded to at the top. Not the most profitable race by any stretch of the imagination for us. So I'm more than happy to put that in the rear view. As we wave the green-white checkered flag on stage one, want to encourage all of you guys and girls out there to follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. We'll drop our first football newsletter of the offseason this Friday, so you haven't already subscribed there. It's a great place to get all of your information in one spot, including all the podcasts that you may have missed during the week and a lot of the back and forth banter that'll make you a much more profitable sports bettor. On to stage two we go, my friend, and we usually use this to unpack some larger betting concepts, and whether it's looking at future odds, whether it's some of the machinations that we'll go through in terms of putting together our betting cards. I think this was a little bit different in terms of a topic that you and I discussed and figured it would be worth broaching on the podcast, because you get caught up in these social media circles, especially for bettors that are new to NASCAR, and they think, look, you go through, you follow enough people that bet the sport, someone is going to have the winner every single week. You're sitting there looking in the mirror going, what am I possibly doing wrong? How am I not profitable? And up 197 units or whatever astronomical numbers we're seeing out there for people's in media and such. So I guess the first question I have for you, you've done this professionally for a while, and Payne and I have talked about this at great lengths when it comes to football. We love being our own boss. We love being rewarded for all of our hard work. But there are portions of our day-to-day that aren't sexy when you're a professional bettor and you're able to put food on the table based on wins and losses. So when you go through stretches betting NASCAR where you're seeing things clearly, do you expand your racing card if things are getting a little bit lean? Or are you trying to be more particular about your bets? How do you go through structuring a race card based on, what we'll talk about all the time on track, having some of that momentum and the wind in your sails more so than running straight on into a headwind?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I want to kind of refer to a text that you sent me after the Xfinity race, and we only had one matchup there, and it was Jeremy Clements over Anthony Alfredo. I can't remember the price, -115 or -120. And you weren't able to watch the race, and I remember you sending me a message that we lost by like 0.05 seconds, so 5/1000ths of a second. And the question wasn't, the next question wasn't, or the next comment that you made was not, oh, bummer, or, oh, we'll get him next time or whatever. It was like, hey, were we the right side? And for me, to be honest, I don't think that was the right side. And so I think you have to go back and say like, hey, was I right or was I getting unlucky? Now you're going to go on runs, and this run for us, that's kind of, we've struggled a little bit. Now the best bets have done well with the exception of last week, but it started at Dover, and when we lost Larson at Dover and we still had Chastain heavy and he ended up losing to Truex late, that was kind of a struggle. And then we went on to Kansas and we had Larson big and we didn't have Denny, and to lose on the last lap pass is tough, but hey, it was still kind of we're on the right side of things. And then we move into Darlington, and we were heavy on Chastain and Larson, and it's like, those guys wreck each other while leading the race. And those moments are harder for me in the moment, because I feel like we got so unlucky. Whereas if I'm wrong, I'm more okay with that, because like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Where was I wrong about this Jeremy Clements and Anthony Alfredo situation, and go back and really unpack why did we get this wrong when we thought we were kind of on the right side of things. And, if you can keep that perspective, kind of throughout the season, that, hey, we're making the right bets, that makes it better. I think that ultimately, if you're a professional sports bettor, if you can get to the point where you make the right bet based on the information that you have and you don't care about the results, that's pure bliss. It's just really, really hard to get there.
Well, I'm not saying, look, no matter what you have for your bankroll, if you have $100 in your bankroll, you have $1,000, 100,000 or seven figures there, I think you're always going to care about the result, because anybody who's doing this with a level of seriousness and sees this as a portion of their income, you do have that competitive drive. You want to figure out what's going right in your processes and what's going wrong and what you need to try and modify. I think when you look at things, though, in the big picture, and it's easy for you and I to say, because we've learned a lot of these lessons the hard way, that some folks that may be tuning in to Stay Green for the first time are betting NASCAR seriously with a little bit different perspective on it, that this is a sport where you can lose 4 or 5 races in a row. You may lose a little, you may lose a little,
Sure.
but if you hit it big, and we had great success the first couple months. I mean, I'm pulling up my sheet right now. I keep itemized looks for how we do on props, how we do on outrights, how we do on head-to-heads from an ROI standpoint. Break it down by track weekends, break it down by month. And February and March, I mean, I could have just hung it up and been done with the season after those 2 months.
I know.
Taken the haul away and gone, you know what? Things have been good. We don't need to continue to grind away. But that's not the way we're conditioned. April and May and, the early portion of June haven't exactly been ideal. But you take away from some of the wins, you're able to pay the losses as a result. And while it may not be the sexiest part of sports betting, because we're in a day and age where everybody apparently wins 92% of their bets, they take $10, they roll them into 100,000, that you have to allocate your resources, because if you're constantly spending your winnings, you're not going to have money to be able to protect during a lean period. And if you're losing early on in a season, you're not going to have money to fight your way out of a slump, reads, whatever you want to try and call it. So I think it's always so important. And the one question that I got, Worm, or I get from some of my buddies, they go, well, do you feel you're a little bit too conservative when you offer things up? Because you and I, look, do things differently. And we see a lot of people on social media. I have 3 units on this outright, 3 units on that. For me, typically I have 1 to 1.5 units allocated for outrights, maybe a little bit more. Now, granted, some of that is related to bet sizing and its limits and some other different complexities to that situation. But look, I mean, if we have a race where we lose 5 or 6 positions, I mean, that's a bad race. I don't have a bad race. Yeah. I mean, I don't have a race where I'm laying out in 47 positions like I see some of the stuff that's out there. And I caution people that are betting this and they're trying to learn the right way and the wrong way to go about it. Look, there are 1,000 different ways to be able to skin a cat in this industry. And when it comes to football and certain weekends, I may have 12 to 15 positions out there, but it's a very different dynamic because all of those games aren't interconnected. Where in NASCAR, you can have one incident and suddenly it flips 6 to 8 positions. I look at Darlington as the perfect illustration, probably the worst race that I've had this year. And you know what? With 12 laps to go, it would have been the most profitable race of the entire damn season. So I think it's important for guys like us to have these discussions, allow new bettors out there to understand that, look, we don't win every single race. We don't win every single weekend. If we did that, as much as we love all of you, and I can speak for Payne, I can speak for Brad Powers, none of us would be creating content if that was the case. If you could hit 92% of all your bets, you'd be sitting on a beach. But I think having these discussions, being able to impart some of these lessons out there to new bettors, it creates some realistic expectations instead of getting caught up in the social media trap that, look, Instagram isn't real life any more than Twitter betting is real life.
Yes, exactly.
By any stretch of the imagination. We don't go out there and advertise. And I used to have a running joke that I said, the only thing I wanted to talk about on social media is when I lost bets, because it would force my friends to stop asking questions because they probably would think I never had a winning weekend in my entire life.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the other thing that's important to understand, and this is the way that I look at kind of the races week in and week out, is of course, everyone wants to have the big race, where you win every bet, you make, however many units, whatever it may be. But I don't necessarily think it's how good your good races are. I think it's how good your bad races are. And if you can kind of, keep your losses to, let's just say, we bet, between maybe 10 units a race, at the most, or even a position.
And full transparency here, by the way, when we look at all that stuff, it is rare for me to have a full position on one driver in the outright market.
Oh,
where
it almost never happens.
We'll look to try and play 1 to 2 positions based on the strength and the edge that we've been able to identify in head-to-head matchups, which I know is a lot different than people out there that want to put up a little bit to make a lot. But we're looking to try and string together singles and be more like Tony Gwynn than we are Pete Incaviglia trying to hit 40 home runs, hitting $196.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I want my good races to be like just profitable, but I want to make sure that my bad races are just barely losses. I think that that's really important to understand for me, I just want to make sure I'm profitable every week. If I can do that in all 3 series, week in and week out, I know that the units or the ROI, that's going to take care of itself. Where very, very rarely do we really take a home run swing at something. I think that there has to be a ton of value on it in order for that to happen. But otherwise, it's like, hey, pick your spots. Try to be profitable, even if it's just one matchup in a truck race, or it's just one matchup in a, even for a cup race, and then just kind of look to live. I think that that's really important to kind of show restraint and just make sure that you're curbing your losses, because the wins are eventually going to come. And if you scroll Twitter after a race, you're going to see someone retweeting everyone complimenting and how many units they won. But there's only 36 cars in a race or 40 cars in a race, and there's only 12 to 15 that can win. So someone is going to win every single week, and they're going to win big. So you just have to make sure that you're kind of staying true to what you think is important to profitability long run. You stick to that, keep your losses to a minimum, and the big wins will take care of themselves.
Exactly. And it's what we always preach around here. And we've done it for Bet the Board since day one across all sports and disciplines. There's a reason we don't offer 7 to 10 best bets on any given show. And it doesn't matter the particular sport. We want people to stay within themselves. It's always important to exercise good bankroll management and never overextend based on any race, any football game, any NBA Finals matchup, or the Stanley Cup. So good discussion there, my friend. Hopefully a lot of people get smarter for it. And for guys that do it as serious as we do, they can understand that, look, we may not win every day, every week, or every month, but at the end of the season, we are going to end up in the black. The hard work will pay off. The breaks will even out. And you just don't know where they're going to come, but you have to make sure that you have enough powder and you have enough liquidity to still be in the fight, even if you've gone through a little bit of a lean period. Wave the green, white checkered flag on stage 2. But, because we're going road course racing this weekend, Worm, we're not stopping for stage breaks. We're motoring right into stage 3. Baby. For a full breakdown of what we're going to see this weekend at Sonoma. And when we look at Sonoma, we are back to the 1.99 mile layout again this year that we came back to in 2021, a far cry from the 2.52 mile road course that we'd seen in the past from 1998 through 2018. You mentioned it at the top of the show. The road course features more than 160 feet of elevation change from its highest point from turn 3A to its lowest point in turn 10. Again, I'm not going to play the counting turns game because it's like Watkins Glen. It's turn 12 for one driver. It's turn 6 for somebody else. We leave that to people in the TV booth. But for the rocket scientists and the math aficionados out there for the Toyota Mart 350, drivers will make about 1,100 turns around the road course. The race spans 110 laps. Stage lengths, 25 in stage 1, 30 in stage 2, and 55 in stage 3. We mentioned no stage breaks, though, so strategy will, of course, play a role. The winner has come from a top 5 starting spot just 3 times, however, in the last 11 years. I do have to ask you before we get into some of the track comps, previous winners, and all of that good stuff, how has the increased exposure, in your opinion, to more road courses changed how you handicap it? Because when you started to get into it, we went road course racing twice. It was Sonoma, it was Watkins Glen, and for a lot of drivers, they admit it. They didn't do a damn thing. There was no sim time. Those were throwaway races, and they were out for a Sunday cruise because they could care less how they did. Now, with a bigger emphasis on the schedule, these can't become throwaway races. The Roval becomes a very important part of the postseason.
Massive.
Do you think it's created an edge for you as a bettor, or do you think it's taken away some of the opportunity?
Well, I actually think it's created an edge. I mean, I remember, when you go back to the days when they were just running Sonoma and Watkins Glen, it was basically Marcos Ambrose versus whatever normal cup guy caught a setup. And it was like, and it was great racing, but it was always Ambrose, for the most part. And
or Michael McDowell at Road America.
Or Michael McDowell. Yeah, that was the Xfinity Series, but he's only won that one time. I mean, I don't want to sound bitter, but man, he's been in some good rides in that thing. And Michael McDowell could have made me a lot of money in the past. However, he did win one time, which was nice to see him get a win. But nowadays, I mean, you're looking at 6 or 7 races a year on these road courses, and one of them coming in the third round of the playoffs. I mean, that is a big damn deal. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity. You're looking at, you look at a guy like Martin Truex Jr. in 2019. I was thrilled to get him at like plus 575. Now he's, he opened at 40-1. I think he's, 30-1 a lot of places now. So because of that, that just shows that there has to be opportunity. There's a lot of guys that I know no one really got paid on a guy like Tyler Reddick last year because he was so consistent, every week at the road course. I mean, he was 40-1 at Coda, but obviously such a good finish at Coda and super fast. You didn't see him have kind of that same price at the other road courses, and he was just really consistent, and he was able to get 2 wins last year. So his price is gone. The deal is you got to get paid on a guy that you think has a little bit of an edge. And I think there is someone this week that's been trending hotter at road courses and is especially good here at Sonoma that I think we can hopefully get paid on. But if you don't get paid, I'm pretty sure that 8-1 is what you got paid on Reddick last year at his first road course win, where he was 40-1 at Coda. So you have to find these guys that have been working on their road course sim time and potentially could pull out a win if they get the track position, because track position is really important. And if you can get it with 10 or 12 laps to go, I think that there's a lot of drivers that have the ability to hold off some of the other road course talent.
When we look at track comps, are all road courses created equally? And I say that somewhat facetiously because I think people are going to default to that being the case. We know Sonoma is a very technical road course. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can go, hey, look, Coda, Watkins, Glen, some are more aerosensitive, some are more technical, some are momentum, some are rhythm, some are speed. When you look at track comps for Sonoma, is there one particular race course or 2 road courses that stand out more than others? Or do you just use Sonoma and the historical sample size we have, albeit only one iteration in the next gen car?
Yeah. The way that I look at this is I want to look at it like, if you look at 2022, who was good at Coda, and then how did they perform at Sonoma? I think that's the best apples to apples comparison. And if you look, there weren't a lot of similarities. I mean, Ross Chastain, Tyler Reddick, AJ Allmendinger, Alex Bowman, and Ryan Blaney were kind of the best, from an average running position at Coda. And then when you go to Sonoma, now there were instances where you had Chase had an issue, Larson had an issue, Reddick had an issue, but those guys weren't kind of in the top 5 outside of Reddick at Coda anyway. So if you go and look at kind of the average running position last year at Sonoma, you have Chris Buescher, Daniel Suarez, Michael McDowell, Kevin Harvick, and Ryan Blaney. So Ryan Blaney is the only driver in the top 5 of average running position of both of those, tracks last year. So I do think that it's really important to look at Coda, and I do think it's really important to macro take a look at just how this particular driver races on road courses. But I think that their track record at Sonoma is the most important thing. I think that trumps over track history at any other track, or just how they ran from a macro perspective at road courses last year. So I would say that Sonoma is kind of really one in its own, and you should really pay attention to their history there versus just their road course ability in general.
All right, well, let's get into the bucket then, and it's pretty easy to delineate between the favorites and the rest of the field, as depending on the book, these prices may vary. As low as 4-1 I've seen on Kyle Larson, upwards of 5, Tyler Reddick 5, 5.5-1, Chase Elliott in that 5-1 range. But clearly, these are 3 drivers that odds makers have placed a premium on backing this weekend. So if we start with Tyler Reddick, 3-time road course winner, victories in 3 of the last 6 road course races in NASCAR's top circuit. When you look, though, at Sonoma, he's never finished better than 19th here. Yeah. His overall road race results speak for themselves, though. Won the road course at Coda this year, distanced himself from the field over the final 12 laps, really pulled away. Won at Road America, won at Indy, 7th at Watkins Glen, 8th at the Roval, 5 top 5, 7 top 10s, and 1 win so far this season. When you look at current form, Tyler Reddick, buying or selling with him listed as a co-favorite this weekend.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Reddick does, because this hasn't been a great road course for him. But last year was kind of his coming out party when it comes to being this super successful road course racer. I have not seen at all the 8 car, or last year the 8 car, or Tyler Reddick kind of be dominant like we've seen some other drivers be at this particular track. I would not be shocked if he came out and was super fast in practice and even pulled it and went out and led a bunch of laps. At this point, I still think that his track record at this particular track is not where it needs to be. I feel like he's a little bit overvalued at this point in the week. Now, that could change really quickly, because I thought that he was overvalued at Coda at 5-1. And then after practice and qualifying, I'm like, hey, we are firing on this guy at 4-1. So that can change. But at this point, I do think that there's other guys that probably have a leg up on him when it comes to just their track history at Sonoma specifically.
Well, you mentioned track position, you mentioned the pole, and there's one man that has dominated in that particular arena, that, of course, being Kyle Larson, who's priced in that very similar range. Some sharper shops have actually drifted him below that 9-2 threshold. 5 straight times, Worm, he has sat on the pole, and that's not just with Hendrick Motorsport. That was also with Ganassi, although back then, to peel back the curtain, we used to love that. He was overvalued. We'd fade him like hell in matchups and watch him drop like a brick more often than not. Did win here back in 2021, finished 15th here last year, got caught out in a bad pit stop and a few issues as he slipped from the top spot early and ultimately outside the top 10. 14th at Circuit of the Americas earlier this year. But as we've seen from Kyle Larson, I mean, look, he's starting to show some of that Jimmy Johnson mold. It doesn't matter what kind of jalopy he unloads in. By the time it's, you need to get to the pay window at the end of that race, Kyle Larson is going to be in the thick of things because he's going records or checkers.
I mean, how bad was my philosophy on Kyle Larson if you took that philosophy last week?
I should have known last week that he was going to get a top 5 finish and be completely irrelevant.
We should have just said, I think he finished second or third. I think he finished second, actually, but he could have finished third behind Hamlin. But either way.
One thing, though, you make that point. I do think he finished 1 and 2 in his on-screen matchups because he lost to Kyle Busch, lost to Denny Hamlin finishing 4th, and the only one he beat, in my recollection, would have been his teammate in William Byron, and Kyle Larson did get steamed against in all 3 of those.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of funny that the week that we actually have the conversation of, you should just take Kyle Larson to win the race and then fade him in matchups. And let me see. I want to see exactly what he finished here. Larson finished 4th. So, you would have had the Hamlin and Kyle against him. You would have cashed those tickets. So it would have been a profitable, depending on how you sourced your units there, would have been a profitable endeavor. But man, they did a great job of getting a good finish last week. I do not think that they will need to have kind of a Hail Mary 2-tire stop in order to get a good finish this week. Last year was, it was the, it was the first time that someone had decided to go out and win stage 1 and wasn't able to kind of work their way back up the field. And everyone kind of went, whoa, shit, if you win a stage, you might never be in the mix again for the rest of the race. So obviously they were trying to be quick on their pit stop undercutting going into stage 3 and, lost a tire there. But he was able to work his way back up through the field, but it wasn't, I still don't think he was going to win the race. I've since changed my opinion. I used to think that he was going to win the race, but I went back and watched it again on Monday, and I just don't think he was going to win that race. He just gave up too much track position. So, with the stage breaks no longer being a thing, I think that, if you qualify well, it's going to be really hard to make a pass. And I think if, he's running in the Xfinity Series and the 17 car for Rick Hendrick, I think that he's going to go out and have a good performance there. Either way, it's going to set him up for to be very prepared for the changes that the track might make or any changes of the car and how that'll affect, maneuverability or the ability to pass. I think that this Kyle Larson should be the favorite, but where's his price going to go? I mean, if he pulls it, I feel like that pull price, it's already baked in. Like,
where's this number? Where's it possibly going to go? I mean, he's down to plus 250. At a prominent shop right now to win the pole. So if Kyle Larson goes out there, puts together great practice laps, wins the pole, so you go from plus 425 to plus 350. I mean, you ain't losing a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah, I think now at this point, you just kind of wait and see. I think he opened at 6 at Westgate or the Superbook. Since come down from there. But at that point, let's just see who's going to be good, because I think that there's other guys that could be fast and could challenge him for this pole.
All right, well, his teammate is one of those drivers that normally on paper would be one of the logical challengers there. We've seen his price, however, drift out. Still in that 5-1, 6-1 range if you shop around. 7 road course victories for Chase Elliott is more than any active driver in the Cup Series, but he, again, has never won at Sonoma, missed Circuit of the Americas earlier this year due to injury, and you look at his 2022 road course results in the next-gen car, 4th at Coda, 8th at Sonoma, 2nd at Road America, 16th at Indy, 4th at Watkins Glen, and 20th at the Roval. Good cars, but never once, in my opinion, did he flash elite speed. And at Road America, Tyler Reddick drove away from him like he was driving a Ford Fusion.
Yeah, this is not the same Chase Elliott on road courses we saw a couple of years ago. And, when we saw him come out, priced this way, I think a lot of it had to do with the success that just Hendrick has had just this year, but ultimately the success that Hendrick's had in qualifying and Larson's success at Sonoma last year. This 9 car just hasn't had the speed. I think that there's been a very clear difference in distinction of speed and handling and maneuverability and the ability to like work your way through the field. I think that the 5 and the 24 have just done a way better job of that than the 48 and the 9. And I think that they have a little bit of catching up to do. And until I see Chase Elliott, feel comfortable in the car, I just don't think he has felt comfortable all year.
Yeah.
Until I see that, I'm not getting involved at 5.
I mean, he hasn't been in the car enough. He's been out of the car for injury. Now he sits out for suspension and all of that. And you have to imagine somewhere along the way, maybe not this week, maybe not next week, but soon, that pressure gets ratcheted up. He's going to have to try and push a little bit more aggressively to get that win, or suddenly NASCAR's most popular driver is going to find himself on the outside looking into the playoff
That's
picture.
A good point. And I think that's a good point that I have not yet thought of is we need to start looking at, Chase Elliott as someone that has to start maybe taking some risks to get a win, because at this point, I don't think he can point his way in. I don't have the standings right in front of me, but I'm not saying they're in desperation mode yet with, 4 of the next 9 races being road courses and his success, but he hasn't had the same success, it is in the last 12 months on these road courses. And I guarantee you have the other guys are going to be a guy like, William Byron's been super fast. He could go out there and win one of these road courses. You also have, Kyle Busch in the 8 car, the same car that went out and won 2 road courses last year, and throw that in with Tyler Reddick and Kyle Larson. I think that there's a little bit of an uphill battle here for Chase Elliott and the 9 team, but I do think you bring up a really, really good point that I have not thought of is they could be on the outside looking in. And if that's the case, what risks are they willing to take to win races? And can we get paid if that's the case? And I think that's a really important point to keep in the back of our mind.
I'll have to identify it. And I think it's always important to listen to some of the interviews because we know Chase is going to be front and center. People are going to look for him. They're going to want to try and pick his brain a little bit and get an overall sentiment on his emotions, knowing that he's under a little bit of a microscope right now, given his on-track actions and the fact that they were willing to park NASCAR's most popular driver. You mentioned some of the guys that'll find themselves in the value tier. And for value, we'll call drivers anywhere from 18-1 or shorter in that 10-1 range. And it's a lot of household names. Ross Chastain, 10-1. William Byron, 10-1. Kyle Busch, 10-1. AJ Allmendinger, your man crush when it comes to road courses in that 16-1 range. Austin Cindric at 18. When you begin to look at that group of drivers, I mean, look, the first thing that jumps off the page to me is Ross Chastain being priced at 10-1. You talked about how quickly the market can catch up to some drivers. I'm not sure it's trended the other way fast enough for Ross Chastain and the fact he's just not getting the performances right now. When you look at William Byron, I mean, look, he's got 1 top 10 at Sonoma in his last 4 finishes. A lot of those, though, he was racing for stage points more so than a win, so it changed a little bit of that dynamic. Yep. Kyle Busch already has as many wins in 15 races with RCR as he did in his final 108 starts with Joe Gibbs Racing, so let that sink in a little bit for you over there. 2 career Sonoma victories as I drop my pen and nearly stab myself in the face. AJ Allmendinger, current form trending up, 3 finishes inside the top 15 over his last 4 races. We talked about how Colleague and their Cup program was well behind the curve. And while he's not contending for wins, quietly, though, he's at least been in contention, which has to give you a little reason for optimism, knowing this is a driver that had 4 top 10s in 2022 on road courses, all of diverse ability levels. And Austin Cindric, 6th at COTA earlier this year. And when you look at the road courses, another guy that had 4 top 10 finishes when you have to make right and left turns. So when you're looking at that value tier, I don't think we have to deep dive all these guys, but if there's 1 or 2 that catch your eye more than anybody else, by all means, dive right in, my friend.
Yeah. So I just want to I'll touch on all of them as I have some notes. Listen, if someone wants to bet William Byron at 10-1, like, you're not going to get an argument from me. I mean, the guy was really, really good at COTA, and he hasn't historically been good at COTA in the past. This year seems just like an anomaly. They've got everything's clicking, and he's matured as a driver. And not that he was immature in the past, but, he's a guy that can hang around a race. And let's look at last year. You look at the guys that made mistakes last year at Sonoma, you had Kyle Larson with a mistake. He goes to the tail end, lose it with a loose wheel. You had Chase Elliott with pitting outside the box. You had Kevin Harvick, who I thought was probably the third best car last year at Sonoma. He had a really slow stop. He made a mistake. And then Tyler Reddick had a speeding penalty. So if those are the top 4 or 5 cars in that race last year, and who was there to kind of take that victory? And I don't want to take anything away from what Suarez and that 99 team did, but you're
going to make an enemigo on this podcast real fast.
An enemigo. That was pretty good for you.
I'm out. You're hosting the rest of the show.
Okay, perfect. All right.
I'm out.
Just a mic drop. I do think that if William Byron can hang around, we saw the top 5 cars in this race kind of bow out with mistakes. If that's the case, William Byron can be there. He can definitely run top 5 and potentially steal a win just based on running solidly and not making mistakes. When we talk about Kyle Busch, I think that, Denny brought up a good point in his podcast that he's run well where the 8 car ran well last year. Well, the 8 car was not as good here as it was at all the other road courses. Now I know that Kyle has, kind of a winning pedigree here at Sonoma, and I certainly think he'll be good, but I'd rather see him. Like, I don't think he's going to qualify on the front row like he did last week. So I do think that if you see a long run potential out of him, because I do think that the Hendrick guys will kind of dominate kind of the top 3 to 5 spots. You might be able to get a better price on Kyle Busch if you see Kyle Larson get a pole. And certainly the 8 car is opportunistic. And that's really important when it comes to these kind of races. You're also with 3 wins in the bank, you can get really aggressive with your strategy. So I do think that Kyle will be good. I just don't anticipate him to be as good as the 9, 5, and then maybe even the 24. When it comes to AJ Allmendinger, really, really tough to gauge how he was last year. No power steering. I mean, you might as well just cross that race off. I think that he's an amazing road course racer. Obviously, he's going to be running in that Xfinity race, and I think that's really, really important to just how you unload the adjustments that you make on your car and in your qualifying. So I haven't seen as much out of Kaulig this year as we saw last year. I thought that they were a little bit more competitive. He started deep in the field last year, and then without that power steering, it's really, really hard to know how good that car was. There was no way he was going to go mix it up with the leaders. So I do think that there's some value here because AJ Allmendinger could qualify in the top 3, and all of a sudden his price is going to drop drastically. I don't care if Larson and Chase Elliott are on the front row. AJ Allmendinger is just like a pit bull, and he's going to go out there trying to win a race.
This is one of 6 races that he has circled before the season starts. Maybe super speedways, but if he's going to create an opportunity for him in the playoffs, he has to go out there and treat this like it's his Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because he can be more aggressive on his strategy. That means maybe he can pit early, with no stage breaks. If he's not running in the top 10, he's going to pit before the stage break, knowing that if a caution does come out on that last lap of a stage break, he's going to inherit the lead. So I do think it gives an advantage to someone like AJ Allmendinger, who's got nothing to lose, who's kind of struggled this season, who knows that if he gets a track position, he's going to be really, really hard to pass. Now, if you want to talk about another guy, Austin Cindric, great at road courses, apparently pissing a few people off last week. I think that, the 3 car obviously voiced some displeasure with that 2 team, but 18-1 is not a bad price for a guy that just kind of gets it done at road courses. And, he hasn't had phenomenal finishes. He's been very competitive, but if you look at just if you count just last year's 6 road courses and then the 1 road course from this year, his average start is 8.3 and his average finish is 8.9, which is super competitive. It's tied for second behind Tyler Reddick. So if you're just looking for someone that's super solid and gonna hang around, I think you can see that Austin Cindric, it could be that guy for you. I'm not overwhelmingly excited about just his ability to qualify at this particular track, but I do think that there might be some value on him at 18-1.
All right, from the favorites, we did value, and now to the long shots, which rarely is an opportunity to identify a race winner so far this season. It's been a relatively chalky campaign. Ryan Blaney at the 600. notwithstanding. But I think this is a race where you have very capable drivers in this particular tier, and maybe not for an outright price, but a top 3, a top 5, or a top 10, should you be so inclined. So when we look at long shots, we may as well start with last year's winner, Daniel Suarez, at 20-1. Led the final 26 laps here in claiming his first Cup victory. You highlighted some of the things that had to go right to get the 99 car out front. So it wasn't necessarily just on raw speed, or he went out there and dusted the field driving a car on a rail, but he did have a 7th place finish last week at Gateway. Was his best since February. So you do wonder if he's trending up and if they've potentially had this race circled on the calendar to get him back to victory lane.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head that a lot had to go wrong, or wrong for other drivers and right for him in order for it. I don't think that, I think that there were multiple times where he was passed last year. So I'm pretty sure that Chastain passed him in the first stage. So I think his car was, kind of average in traffic, but when he was able to get to the lead, you get that clean air, you get the downforce, and you don't have to worry about the wake of any other cars. Yeah, you can be fast. And I don't want to take anything away from his win, because I did think it was great for the sport, great for Suarez, great for Trackhouse, but a lot had to go wrong for a lot of other drivers. And I think that that's why I think he's properly priced at that 20-1 range. I'd rather wait and see what he looks like in practice.
Completely fair, and that's a luxury we're afforded. No reason to run and bet a driver now, because I don't think that number will come crashing down either from where it currently sits. Chris Buescher, 22-1, 8th at Coda earlier this season. Last 5 road course race finishes look like this. 2nd at Sonoma last year, 6th at Road America, 10th at Indianapolis, which included his car catching on fire and still finishing inside the top 10. 9th at Watkins Glen, 6th at the Roval. This is a driver whose odds were a little bit higher earlier in the week. They've come down some. We've talked a little bit about RFK Racing and this overall program trending in the right direction. Last week's performance from our best bet top 10 on Brad Keselowski, losing a cylinder in the first 5 races, first 5 laps notwithstanding. Chris Buescher, driver that you're factoring into some of your handicapping this weekend.
Yeah, I think he's going to be good. He was a 2nd place car, but that was with 5 or 6 of them exiting the race. So he was not able to pass Suarez. I think that if you think Suarez is properly priced at that 20-1 range at this track, then Chris Buescher is also probably properly priced, because he couldn't pass Daniel Suarez. Now, the one thing that he does have going over Suarez is he's actually been more consistent on road courses. So although I might like Suarez more at the 20-1 price to win, I do think that some of these auxiliary bets on Chris Buescher, maybe top 5 or top 10, might be where you can find some value, because he's just been way more consistent on these road courses. And I mean, that Indy race was incredible. I mean, he wouldn't even get out of the car. There was a fire in his car, and he's like, no, put it out. He goes 2 laps down, still battles all the way back to finish in the top 10. I thought it was remarkable. He's been super consistent. I anticipate him to be consistent again this week, although I do not think he will be a factor to win the race.
Martin Truex Jr., we've seen his number as low as 22-1 out there in the market, but if you shop around, you can still find upwards of 30 and even some 35s. So rare in this day and age that you see such a wide range on a driver like this. Recent run of poor performances on road courses, which is pretty much rinse and repeat for everybody in that JGR camp. Last year finished 7th, 26th, 13th, 21st, 23rd, 17th. In the 6 races where you have to make left turns. Wasn't much better this year at Circuit of the Americas, where he was 17th. But he does have 3 career victories here, most recent coming back in 2018. And when you look at how he performed last year, slipped to 26th in the next-gen car. Basically, JGR ran 25th through 30th pretty much the entire day. Current form, though, trending up, top 10s in 6 of his last 8 outings this season. How do you view the 19 and his prospects for victory this weekend?
Well, I'll tell you what, if Toyota had been a little bit more successful last year, or even at Coda, then I would say that this would be probably a banger bet. Now, I know that everyone's going to say that, that a Toyota did win at Coda, but he was way better than the rest of the Toyotas, in my opinion. And listen, Truex, it's just crazy that I used to beg to get him at like 6-1 to win this race, and now he opens at 40. Now, I understand that, he's run much better this year than I think he has last year. Not necessarily from a speed perspective, but from like a chance to win the race perspective. Obviously, goes out and wins at Dover and had a really, really strong run at Darlington. Where Martin struggled this year is when he's back in traffic, he hasn't had the ability to make passes. And, Toyota struggled a little bit when it comes to qualifying. And when I say that, I don't mean all Toyotas. I think that we have Tyler Reddick that's very exempt from the Toyota conversation. But, again, if Truex looks good, I think you're still going to get paid on him. He's just been a non-factor, in my opinion, at these road courses. And I think Steve Letarte hit the nail on the head last year when he said that this sequential shifting will actually hurt Martin Truex because he was so good at the standard gearbox that they ran. And we just haven't seen him be competitive on road courses. And until that happens, I don't know that I want to get involved at any price, just because I do think that there's 3 or 4 guys that have really solidified themselves as the fastest on road courses, and I anticipate them to qualify well and to be the favorites. And if Truex looks good on the long run, I think we still get paid on him.
Kevin Harvick, right around that 25-1 range thereabouts, owns one Sonoma victory that came back in 2017. Top 10 in 6 of his last 7 races in Northern California. Not a guy that professes to be a road course racer, but this track seems to suit his talents as he's gone out there and put together real competitive performances, even if he hasn't had the ability to win as many races as he'd like.
In my opinion, arguably the second best car last year. And, we had the conversation when he opened at 40, should we take him? And then 10 minutes later, he was 25-1. So obviously, when Superbook posts odds, you cross your fingers and hope that the market doesn't kind of follow what they do, or if they're gonna, you hope that the guy that you look at doesn't just get smashed, and he did. So I do think Kevin Harvick will be good. Again, I still think he was maybe a distant third, maybe a second. If you take Chase Elliott, you say that they were kind of comparable, but he was able to work his way through the field. I really do think that this was not a strategy, finish for him. He started 23rd last year in this race and drove his way up to the front. So do not let anyone tell you that this was a strategy call. I think that the 4 car had a lot of speed last year. He was really comfortable in his car. He looked good in practice. He qualified terribly, and he had owned up to that. So I do think that there's a lot of upside for Kevin Harvick. I just haven't quite seen that top end speed out of him this year. I know that he went and drove to the lead at Phoenix, but he was Harvicking. He was running a line that no one else could run. And I just don't think you can do that at this particular track unless your setup is perfect. So if they hit the setup, I do think he could be competitive, but I don't know that you're going to miss out on any prices, because I think he went off at 50-1 last year with his qualifying effort. So we'll see what happens, but I think that he could be a guy we find on our card later this week.
A quintet of drivers priced at 30-1 that offer a little bit of intrigue, so I'll rattle them off real quick. Christopher Bell in that low 30s range, Ryan Blaney as well, Joey Logano 40, Alex Bowman 40, Michael McDowell at 50. When you look at Christopher Bell, current form, nothing to write home about. His road course form, nothing to write home about either. With that Roval finish that ended up punching his ticket in the playoffs, appears to be an outlier. He did, however, finish 3rd at COTA last year. Ryan Blaney has now moved to the current points leader, top 10 in 6 of his last 7 races this season. And when you look at how he's done at Sonoma, 3 straight top 10 finishes, does have a road course win that came back in 2018 on the Roval. Joey Logano, who we mentioned, 4th in 2021, but his previous 3 finishes here, all outside the top 12. Only scored a top 10 twice in 6 road course races last year. The 6th at Indy comes with a giant asterisk. And when we talk about Joey Logano, Watkins Glen appears to be the one road course where he always performs a lot better than the market gives him credit for. 28th at COTA earlier this year. Alex Bowman, top 10 in 2 of his last 4 Sonoma starts, 3rd at Circuit of the Americas this spring. And of course, Michael McDowell, a road racer by nature, 4 top 10s on them last season, including a 3rd at Sonoma and 6th at Watkins Glen. Finished just outside the top 10 at COTA earlier this year, but does come in riding high after his 2nd top 10 of the season at Gateway. He did, however, practice well, qualified a little bit underwhelmingly, but showed race competing speed. So it shouldn't come as a total shock how he did at Gateway. A huge fan of the 2-tire stop. When you look at the long shots, whether it's the guys I've mentioned or somebody I've omitted, somebody that catches your eye, or maybe a couple of drivers that you want to touch on real quick before we wave the green, white checkered flag, or I should say the checkered flag on stage 3.
Okay, yeah, I just want to glaze over Logano and Bowman really quickly. I just don't think that they're on the same playing field as their teammates. I think that Ryan Blaney has solidified himself as way faster than this 22 team and Joey Logano, and the same goes for Alex Bowman. I think the 5 and the 24 are much faster at this point. And also Alex Bowman, I feel like is kind of fallen off a little bit. I don't know if that seat time is that important to him, but not really relevant the last couple of weeks when he's been in the car. So I don't anticipate him having a great run. Kind of gonna stay away from him. Going to stay away from Logano, especially when you see his teammate priced at anywhere from 30 to 35 to 1. I really like Ryan Blaney this week. He's got a lot of speed. He ran well here last year. He was also the only driver in the top 5 of average running position on both COTA last year and Sonoma last year. I really do think that Ryan Blaney has a lot of momentum, and I'm kind of looking forward to see what he does in the next few weeks. I think he's a little bit of an underrated road course racer, and if you're going to give me 32 to 1 on, in my opinion, one of the fastest drivers in the sport right now, I think that's a decent bet. So when it comes to Michael McDowell, man, he was just kind of bullying his way around there, just taking 2 tires every chance he got and got a good finish out of it. And I do anticipate him kind of running near the top 10 at all points this week. Just he's a great road course racer. I think he'll qualify well. And but I still think that Blaney would be my top guy out of those 4 drivers that we just discussed.
Completely fair. Hey, look, current form says a lot, and we talked at great detail about Ryan Blaney showing speed, how talented he was as a driver. And every now and again, when you see that ball go through the hoop, so to speak, you get to be a lot more confident. And we'll see if Ryan Blaney is able to parlay some of that raw speed into good finishes and wins. When you look at Blaney, not a fluke that he now is number 1 in the overall points when you consider that his average finish of 11.3 this year is number 1 in the Cup Series. I think that'd be lost on a lot of people. And when you look at his last 7 races, 6 of those 7 have been top 10 finishes, a number of those of the top 5 variety. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board, follow Bet the Board Pod. And if you're looking for a little bit more NASCAR coverage with some up-to-date information, not only will we post an additional matchup or something of that variety on the Bet the Board website come Sunday, but you can check out Chris's pre-race poll as he breaks down a lot of the things that he's learned through driver interviews and, of course, practice data that end up factoring in quite prominently to the matchups that we find ourselves on for the weekend. But Wormser, your job is not done yet, my friend. Portion of the program that we'll call the Redemption Tour as we look to identify the most actionable element, also known as the best bet portion of Stay Green.
I'm going to stick with my boy Ryan Blaney. Canby shops have him listed plus 130 top 10. I think that that's a great bet. I anticipate him to qualify well, and I expect him to kind of run kind of towards that top 5 all day and maybe even contend for a win. So I think if you're getting to get that plus 130 price, I really like that. I think that's the best bet that I've seen at this point in the week.
All righty. In the 12 car, we trust to be able to make things happen. See if Ryan Blaney can channel a little bit of his magic and make some things happen this weekend as we head out to Sonoma, the final race of the Fox portion of the NASCAR calendar. Everything will flip over to NBC Sports shortly thereafter. Amazing, buddy, how time flies when you're having fun, and we are essentially at the de facto halfway point and even closer to the playoffs, as this will mark race 16, or at least of the points-paying variety. Only 10 races to go before we'll know the 16 drivers vying for series immortality and to call themselves Cup champions. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots, things that you'd like to share with our loyal listenership?
No, I mean, we're not doing a no podcast next week, right?
Yeah, we got a little bye week.
Weekend.
So I'm going to give you the week off for good behavior. Early July, I'll be on the road. So we'll come up with a contingency plan and figure things out. Maybe bring in a guest host to try and partake if we feel that they're cut from the Stay Green / Bet the Board cloth. Or since you did such a phenomenal job earlier or late last year in October with the playoff races going solo, that maybe we'll give you the reins and be able to sort all that out. But we have plenty of time for that. But no show next week, given the bye week. We will, of course, have plenty of college football previews, though, to keep people in action as we'll switch from Group of 5 to the Power 5 conferences and talk a little ACC. So, all right, my friend, this is a 2-week hiatus from you and all the Stay Green listenership. Like we said, follow Chris on Twitter. You can watch that pre-race poll. He does an outstanding job breaking everything down on race day. He'll let you know exactly what time that'll go live. And if you have to miss it there, it's always available on tape delay. So for Chris, I'm Todd. Ryan Blaney, top 10 plus $1.30 ticket in hand. Hopefully come the checkered flag Sunday afternoon from Wine Country. We'll see you at the window.